What's going on, everybody? So, I don't know about you, but I thoroughly enjoy playing Joust, and more specifically, ranked Joust. However, when I first started trying to competitively play, I ran into problems figuring out what exactly I was doing wrong, and upon looking it up on YouTube, I only found nebulous fragments of how ranked Joust is properly played. So my goal in this video is to show a pretty in-depth analysis of how this game mode is played, all the way from identifying key map icons and contention points, to builds and team compositions. However, to preface this though, this is my experience that I have learned, and some things may vary depending on rank, and there are some things that I may miss, as this video's goal isn't to cover every nuance within ranked Joust, but rather to cover the better idea of how to play in order to shed some light on this game mode. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, I'm going to be splitting this video up into 3 main sections to make this more cohesive and understandable, or if you want to skip ahead. Oh, and if you do enjoy this video and found it to be useful, feel free to like and subscribe, as this video took a lot of effort to make. Thanks. So this is the current Joust map at the timing of this video, and for the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume you know the general layout of this map, but if you don't, I'm going to really quickly go over it. So as you can see, we have our Titan, Phoenix, and Tower, and on the other side we see our enemy's Tower, Phoenix, and Titan. We have 5 buff camps, one being speed, the other being mana, and the last one being damage. Additionally, we also have 3 XP camps, and all the way in its own little pocket we have the Bull Demon King, which once killed gives your team health and mana regen, as well as disables the current tower or phoenix that is currently up, and this can also resemble the fire giant within Conquest. Quickly highlighting the Bull Demon King, this is the main contention point within this game mode, as disabling a tower or phoenix in a very linear map such as Joust is crucial and can very easily win games. Other than that, we have one other contention point being the red buff, due to there only being one on the map and it being in a very neutral position. And the same can be said about the mid XP camp, but it's not as important. Moving on, another important detail deals with prioritizing farm within the map. Making sure you're clearing buff camps as well as XP camps as soon as possible on timer is a really good way to get ahead of your enemies. For example, if I clear my blue, then my speed, and then my XP camps as soon as they spawn on the map, then that means the sooner these camps are back on their cooldown timer, which maximizes my XP and gold. Whereas if I didn't, then there's sitting farm on the map losing you the potential of maximizing that farm, because the timer on the buff and XP camps after you've cleared them will always have the same respawn timer, which is always 2 minutes. So prioritizing clearing buffs as soon as possible, usually after clearing minion waves or getting kills, is really important if you want to get ahead of your enemies, which ultimately makes it easier to secure the win. One quick thing I want to put in before wrapping up this section is how to start your buff camps in the very beginning of the game. There seems to be some kind of confusion in how to maximize clearing your buff camps in order to get to the wave quicker, but very simply, if one of your team members had an ability that can do damage over a wall, usually it's a mage, but sometimes a hunter, they can be doing damage behind the wall in order to more quickly clear your speed buff so you can get to your blue quicker. So, moving on, I'm going to cover this section by going over the most played team compositions you are most likely going to see. So, as you can see, here are the top 10 most played team comps based on matches played, as well as the win rate. Pause if you want to get a better look at them. Now, for the sake of making this more easy to digest and understand, I'm going to put all of these team comps into 2 main groups. The first main group embodies a team comp that has 2 tanks and 1 damage dealer, where both of the tanks are usually any combination between Guardian and Warrior. And this is what majority of the people identify ranked Joust with, due to how seemingly broken it can be. From being able to have twice the potential for peel and setup for their damage dealer, to being able to backline the enemy team's damage dealers because they are so tanky and have a lot of base damage, this comp's utility and all-around early to mid-game presence should be unrivaled. But moving into our second main group, however, this team comp embodies 1 tank and 2 damage dealers, where both are pretty invariable, almost always being a mage and hunter. Now, this comp is the most popularly played and is usually labeled as the traditional team comp, as there is 1 guardian, 1 hunter, and 1 mage. But with this team comp, there is far more potential as the game goes on comparatively to the first group, as having a late game hunter and mage allows for massive amounts of damage towards tanks and the ability to essentially one-shot their damage dealers. Also, having a mid to late game hunter now unlocks the ability to solo the Bull Demon King quickly, along with being able to shred the Tower, Phoenix, and Titan, where in the 2 tank team, you're not able to do this as quickly unless you're playing the 2 Guardian 1 Hunter team comp, which in my opinion is the best team comp, albeit not as popular. Also, you can fit in assassins in both of these types of team comps, which is arguably the most diverse role, as they can act as the tank, damage dealer, or even bruiser. One thing to note is that not all tanks and damage dealers are good in Joust, which seems pretty obvious, but more importantly, building a team with gods that have abilities that cover weaknesses and synergizes really well is the main idea behind a solid comp. So for example, if I build a team where I have 2 tanks, one being Cthulhu and the other being Guan Yu, and let's say the damage dealer is a Vulcan. Well, this team has a lot of damage that they can dish out, but one glaring flaw is that there is very little consistent peel, along with Vulcan not having a very secure getaway ability. So if your opponents were smart, they would pick gods to counter this, where if they decided to, let's say, have a Cabrakan and a Horus and a safe mage like Scylla, there's very little that Vulcan can do if it's ulted by Cabrakan. Now this is not to say winning isn't possible with this team comp, but you're starting the game off disadvantaged with a team like this. Which is why creating a solid, well-rounded team is key if you want to make your life easier, rather than picking any god within a certain role. With all this in mind and understanding some of the dynamics involved into making a good team comp, I'm going to list a few standard comps that I believe are really good. So starting off with the 2 tank comps, I have Cabrakan, Bacchus, and AMC, or if he's banned, Chiron is a good substitute. Like I said earlier, I think this type of team comp is OP, just because of how much setup and peel 2 Guardians can generate, on top of the fact that they do really good damage, and having a safe hunter in the back only adds to how strong a team like this is. Another one that I like to go is Sobek, Cuchulainn, and Sol. Being able to have one of the best peel abilities in the game with Sobek, while Cuckoo does huge damage to backliners and even frontliners, all while having the best of both worlds with burst and auto attack damage with Sol, makes this team super hard to go up against. Now of course you can interchange some of these gods, but keep in mind why these teams are really strong, highlighting good damage, peel, and setup ability. Finally, the second main group that I have is Atlas, Medusa, and Baron, calling back to the traditional comp with Guardian, Mage, and Hunter. And again, you can interchange Atlas with a god like Ganesh, seeing as Atlas gets banned a lot. But what is good about this team is the capability of burning beads off the enemy team, so something like a Medusa ult or Baron ult will always hit. Keeping in mind that you have a Ganesh or Atlas that has really good setup and peel and can also burn those beads as well. Really quickly though, I wanted to say that I can make a video going into more depth about the team comps in terms of countering enemy gods or even gods that synergize really well if anyone is interested. But for the purposes of this video, that's too far in depth. So now you know the basics of what makes a good team comp and some examples of them, let's move on to the next section. In this section, we're going to be taking a look at the starter items that are essential, as well as some situational items to keep in mind while planning out the main ones that are important. So starting off, looking at all the main starter items that are going to be used most of the time, they are Sands of Time, Sentinel's Gift, and Warrior's Axe. Other than that, if you're a physical ADC, you're probably going Bluestone or Mannequin Scepter, but if you're taking this role, most of these starter items are fine, outside of maybe Gilded Arrow, as this is one of the worst starter items. Following that, more niche items that are still good or are used for countering purposes are Animosity, Tainted Steel, and War Flag. And as far as every other starter item goes, they aren't really good, at least at the timing of this video. So with that being said, I'm going to go over every main starter item and explain why they are good, when to use them, and when not to use them. Starting off, let's take a look at arguably the best starter item, which is Sentinel's Gift. It has 10 physical and magical prots, 75 health, and 7 MP5. And it only costs 550 gold. And with its passive that gives you 8 gold, 15 health, and 8 mana based on each minion and or jungle monster dying, it doesn't get much better than this. However, the main focus of this item is the amount of gold you get from its passive. Although it's only 8 gold, this eventually stacks up rather quickly, and before you know it, after let's say 3 minion waves, you now have an extra 144 gold, and that's not accounting the jungle camps you're doing as well. On top of that, this item helps with health and mana sustain, as per minion wave, you're getting an extra 90 health and 48 mana. Furthermore, having 7 MP5 helps you sustain mana, as in the beginning of the game, you burn through a lot of mana easily. And then finally, with it costing very little gold, you're able to start every game with extra gold to buy things such as an extra health or mana pot, or even a health chalice. Now moving on to the upgraded starter items, we have either Sentinel's Boon or Sentinel's Embrace. So Sentinel's Boon giving you 45 prots, 300 health, and 20 MP5, but the passive being the most notable part of this item, which gives you 4% health and mana back based on getting an assist on enemies, as well as an extra 15 gold if you have the lowest gold. So having extra prots and percent health back makes this, for the most part, your go-to upgraded starter item. Then we have Sentinel's Embrace, which gives you 30 prots, 200 health, and 20 MP5, with a passive that gives protections to our teammates, as well as 6 gold every 5 seconds, if you have the lowest gold. Now I would say you only go this item if you're really trying to support your team with protections, or if they have substantial anti-heal where it wouldn't be wise to use Sentinel's Boon. Other than that, Sentinel's Boon is better for the most part, and with the relatively recent buff where you're able to upgrade support items at level 15 instead of level 17, whichever upgrade you go, Sentinel's is one of the best starter items to use. Moving on, the next main starter item we're going to take a look at is Sands of Time for mages. This item gives you 25 power, 10 MP5, and 10% cooldown, and its passive gives you extra MP5 based on missing mana and an extra 15 true damage to minions. Now the only other item that resembles Sands of Time is Conduit Gem, but in almost every area, Sands of Time is better in terms of MP5 and cooldown. Also, Sands of Time gives you that freedom to not have to build Chronos Pendant, which isn't necessarily a bad item, but there are far superior items you can build now that Chronos isn't taking up an item slot. So essentially, always build Sands of Time if you're acting as the mage in your team comp. It's just the best. Taking a look at the upgraded starter items, however, we have Pendulum of the Aegis, which gives you 90 power, 20 MP5, and 20% cooldown, with a similar passive of MP5 per 10% missing mana, but this time you get 10 power per 10% of available mana. So, in layman's terms, the more mana you have, the more damage you get. And then the other is Alternate Timeline, which takes a more tanky route of having 70 power, 45 prots, and 10% cooldown, with a passive that essentially revives you with 25% health and mana, with this only occurring every 6 minutes. Now this may sound really good, but in practice, you are only ever able to use your passive once a game due to it being 6 minutes long, and it also requiring you to be level 20 to upgrade it. So if you orient yourself towards more of a damage mage, you're going to go Pendulum of the Aegis, but if you want more prots and that extra life, you're going to go Alternate Timeline. However, I would say most of the time you're going to buy Pendulum of the Aegis. Finally, moving into the last main starter item, we have Warrior's Axe, which has 10 physical power, or if you're a magical character, you have 15 power, along with 10 of each protection. Its passive steals 30 health and restores 20 mana every time you damage the enemy god, and this can only occur every 10 seconds. Now you're usually buying this item if you are acting as the bruiser within your team comp, being able to dish out damage and take damage at the same time. It's just an all-around good item. Now moving into the upgrades, we have Sundering Axe, which has 40 physical power, or if you're magical, has 65 magical power, with 30 of each prot. And as far as the passive goes, it's essentially the same thing, but instead of stealing flat numbers, it steals 2% health. And then we have Hero's Axe, which gives 45 prots, 300 health, and 30% crowd control reduction. And its passive gives a shield equal to 15% of your maximum health towards allies if they get hit by a hard crowd control effect. So usually if you're building Warrior's Axe, you're trying to do damage as well as be tanky, so building Sundering Axe is what you should build. But building Hero's Axe isn't a bad choice if you feel you need to support your team more. Now going into ADC starter items, you can sort of build any of them that you like Bluestone, Mannequins, Hunter's Cowl, or even Death's Toll. But you should build it based on what your ADC is good at. For example, if I'm playing Uller, which is an ability-based god, the only item you should be buying is Bluestone. Or if I'm playing Rama, which is an auto-attack oriented god, I'm probably buying Death's Toll or Hunter's Cowl, as buying Bluestone makes no sense, as Rama has virtually no ability damage. So making sure you know what your ADC thrives in will dictate which starter item you should go. Now wrapping up this section, I'm going to briefly go over the rest of the starter items that are more niche or counter-oriented. Starting off with Benevolence, it has 100 health, 10 MP5, and HP5 with a passive that basically gives you and your teammates health and gold. Now the passive is pretty complicated, but you can pause if you want to read more into it. But really this item is only built in Joust for its upgraded version, which is Animosity. And because of that, we're basically going to pretend that its other upgraded version, which is Compassion, doesn't exist because it's never used in Joust. However, the reason why this item is built is because Animosity deals bonus damage equal to 3% of maximum health as magical damage towards enemies and structures. So gods that are auto attack oriented like Bellona, Gilgamesh, or Amaterasu benefit from this greatly. So pairing this with health related items and kins, you're doing absurd damage all while being tanky at the same time. But other than this item is virtually never played. The next item is Tainted Steel, which has pretty good base stats, but you're really only buying this if the enemy has crazy amounts of anti-heal, like if they had a Guan Yu or even an Afro. And so its passive basically has 15% anti-heal, of which you are healed 100% of the healing reduced. And as far as the upgraded versions go, either one of them are good to go into, it's just a matter of what type of anti-heal you prefer, as well as the difference in protections from physical to magical. And the last one is War Flag. I was tempted to put this one in the essential list at the beginning due to it having really good base stats and having a passive similar to Sentinels. However, very few people buy it, which doesn't necessarily deem its worth, but definitely makes it a less popular item you will see. Also, it's not as good as Sentinels, but looking at its stats, it has 10 prots, 100 health, and 10 MP5, with a passive that gives 1% movement speed and 2% attack speed, stacking up to 10 times, right after getting an assist on an enemy death. Furthermore, upon getting 3 or more stacks once per ability, you restore 18 health and mana, while also giving 10 gold. Now this is a lot, but it's essentially Sentinels, but geared more towards your team rather than yourself. And as far as the upgraded starters go, War Banner is a better version of War Flag, while Spartan Flag gives some power and has a passive that calls down a flag, providing 10% increased power within the flag's radius. Other than that, basically every other starter item like Eye of the Jungle or Boomba's Dagger doesn't really serve a purpose in Joust, or at the very least are outshined by better starter items. And with that being said, let's move on to the core items. Finally, in this last section, we're going to take a look at important items that should almost always be built, as well as how builds should be oriented based on what role and class you're filling within your team comp. So let's begin with the important items that you'll almost always be buying. Starting with the Tank Guardian role, arguably the most important item for yourself and your team is Gauntlet of Thebes. This has to be the go-to item at the beginning of the game that at least one tank should go, with it having 55 protections, health, and HP 5, with its passive of giving 10 protections to the rest of your team. On top of it being only 2,350 gold, there's nothing that comes close to how good this item is. Making sure at least one of the tanks, preferably the Guardian, has this item is extremely important. Following this, Emperor's Armor is another incredible defensive utility item to help you siege and defend your towers. It has 300 health, 60 physical protections, and has a passive that decreases enemy towers' attack speed by 30% and increases your own tower's attack speed by 50%. So not only does this item cost a very cheap 2,000 gold, it gives you extra physical protections, making you more tanky, while also reducing the attack speed of their tower, which essentially makes their tower completely useless. But be careful, as the enemy might buy Emp Armor, which essentially nullifies yours. But overall, a very important item to buy. Now this next item isn't necessarily an item, but a placeholder for what you should be focusing on, which is MP5, protections, and cooldown. So in terms of good MP5 and protection items, Manticore Spikes and Heartward Amulet are excellent items to not only help your team, but also to make you tankier while essentially never running out of mana. In addition, having items that provide cooldown like Genji's Guard, Shogun's Husari, and Pridwin are also very good items to buy as well. Finally, the last core items for Tank Guardians involve damage items. Unlike Conquest, in Joust, it's in the tank's best interest to build items that also do a bit of damage, but because they are barely going to have any power, they need to use items that sort of flow with their build. And so 2 items that get that job done is Soul Reaver and Ethereal Staff. With Soul Reaver having 95 power with 300 mana, with a passive that grants 2% additional damage on top of the already established damage, this helps tanks do massive amounts of damage that they wouldn't normally do because they have very little power. And if you build this in conjunction with Ethereal Staff, which has 90 power, 200 health, and 20% CCR, with a passive that steals 8%, maximum mana, and 6% maximum health every 15 seconds, you're dealing hundreds of extra damage while also gaining more health and mana, which ultimately makes you tankier. So making sure you're building at least one of these, but preferably both, is important for your core build. You can also switch one of these slots with something else that has more utility, like maybe a Spear of the Magus or Staff of Mirrodin, but that can be decided on a case-by-case basis. Now moving into the tank/warrior role, and keep in mind this assumes that they also have a Guardian on their team in order to build things like Gauntlet, but if not, and there's only one tank warrior on the team, then follow the general layout of the tank Guardian role. But in this role, the warrior should be building tanky, but also more damage oriented. So one core item almost every warrior should be building is Gladiator's Shield, with it having 20 power, 40 physical protections, 250 health, and 10% cooldown, with a passive that stacks more damage on abilities based on the amount of protections you have. This has to be the best hybrid physical item you can build. So making sure you find room in your build for this item is really important. Additionally, you can stack Gauntlet of Thebes regardless if it seems like a waste, just because of how cheap and OP this item is. But other than that, you can sort of interchange items to fit your team, so if you're facing a team with a lot of physical damage, you can build items like Sovereignty or Breastplate of Valor. Or if you're facing a team with a lot more magical damage, you could build items like Genji's Guard or Heartward Amulet. Or if you don't want to do any of that, Spirit Robe is a good all-around item as well, due to having decent protections, cooldown, and damage mitigation. So essentially what was talked about earlier, focusing MP5, protections, and cooldown. With this, you can't really go wrong, you just need to find what best suits your team. But finally, there are core items that involve damage that should almost always be built, and the first one is Heartseeker. This item should be built later on as it's decently expensive and scales better the longer the game goes. It has 65 power, 200 mana, 20 MP5, and 10% physical penetration. But most importantly is its passive, which deals an additional 3% damage towards their maximum health, which should sound familiar to what was talked about earlier with Soul Reaper and Ethereal Staff. Due to it dealing percent damage on top of the already established damage, every tank/bruiser should fit this item in. For example, if they have two squishy damage dealers, it might be good to fit a flat penetration item in, like a Jotun's Wrath or Brawler's Beatstick, or if they have two tanky frontliners, it might be better to build a Titan's Bane or a Serrated Edge. Lastly, we're going to talk about the damage dealing role, starting with Mage. So we are currently in a stacking meta right now, and with a recent buff adding flat penetration to Book of Thoth, I don't know why they did this, it's no wonder why this item is one of the best items to build. When fully stacked, it has 80 power, 10 magical penetration, 1000 mana, and 20 MP5. But what really makes this item great is its passive that converts 10% of your mana into magical power, which is crazy. Following that, prioritizing an item such as Soul Gem earlier in the game should be core, as it gives 80 power, 150 health, 12% lifesteal, and 10% cooldown. With its passive dealing an extra 25% of your magical power, and a large heal based on 30% of your magical power upon getting 3 stacks based on a successful ability hit. It's a very good item that gives you almost everything you want besides penetration, which happens to be the focus of the next item. Building items that have flat penetration and or percent penetration is going to make doing large amounts of damage so much easier. So building items like Spear of Desolation or Spear of the Magus is good and should be prioritized if you're facing a team that doesn't have a lot of defense, where building items like Obsidian Shard or Staff of Mirrodin is good against teams that are building more tanky. So looking at how your enemies are building is crucial to decide which type of penetration you should be prioritizing. Finally, the last item that is core is Soul Reaver and Ethereal Staff, and similarly to what was talked about earlier in the Guardian section also applies here, except that Soul Reaver and Ethereal Staff exemplifies the damage on top of the large amounts of damage you are already doing. And not only that, if the enemy team is building health related items, then Soul Reaver and Ethereal Staff easily shuts down these items, as Soul Reaver reaches 9% maximum damage at 2750 health. And it's not that hard to get that amount of health, so making sure you buy this item is crucial. Very quickly going over the physical ADC role, there really isn't as much emphasis on ADCs in Joust, and they don't really diverge too much from regular builds you see elsewhere. So basically, if you're an ADC, the only thing that I would say is to not build crit most of the time, due to how much easier it is to build spectral armor in Joust. You are better off building prot shred items like Executioner and health related damage items like Kins, which happens to be core items on almost every hunter, except maybe Uller. Also making sure to build either Transcendence or Devourer's Gauntlet is a must, but outside of that it's pretty straightforward. If you're an auto attack hunter, build items that facilitate faster auto attack speed, or if you're an ability based hunter like Uller or AMC, build things like Transcendence, Crusher, and Heartseeker. Also, I forgot to mention anti-heal items. If you're facing heavy healing teams, someone needs to build something that has anti-heal, whether it be Pestilence or Divine or Brawler's Beatstick. I hope you guys at the very least learned something today and are able to take something from this video and apply it towards your games. If you enjoyed this video at all, I would really appreciate if you liked and subscribed, as it took me a long time to make and edit this video. And if you like these types of videos, please let me know, as I can make future videos about other things related or non-related to Smite. Other than that, thank you guys for watching.